Welcome back, my family, my Be Health Empowered family, to another week of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clarke. Please call me Dr. Mel. I'm an emergency medicine physician with a whole bunch of years of experience. And I am also a population health expert. And that is why I am here to talk with you and have this wonderful show that is specifically designed to bring you the evidence and scientific information so that you can make sound healthcare decisions for yourself, your family, and even your community. You know, we're right here streaming on YouTube, Facebook. If you're newbies to the show on these platforms, please hit subscribe if you're on YouTube, and definitely hit like if you're on Facebook. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for that. Remember, this is a participation show. So please put those questions in the chat, put your comments in the chat. We are there for it all, and we are going to get to them on a first come, first serve basis. So put them in, the earlier, the better. So now let us get into creating an amazing week for ourselves with all the health topics we're going to cover tonight. But you know, I don't do this alone. I have to have my man and woman on the street co-producers, Mr. Wayne Bruce and Miss Lila Mays. How y'all doing?
What it do? What it do? What
Hey,
up?
Dr. Mel.
What's up, Lyle? That's a cute hat. I like that.
I know.
Hey, thank you.
Looking all fly with the hat. Very
Little
nice.
color pattern, little things
Cool.
matching up everything. So look,
So
we might as well
what's
stay
going
with
on?
it. We might as well stay with it, Dr. Mel. You know what time it is. Let's get into the recap because we got a great show. I heard we got a great show. So
We do have a great show. We're going to be celebrating. This is the last Monday, the last week of Heart Health Month, and it's all about that plant-based life today. What does plant-based eating really mean? How do you get started? What are the health benefits? Can you really thrive on it? So we're going to have both a cardiologist and a bodybuilder. Okay, y'all heard me right. A bodybuilder who are going to help us break down the plant-based life. Just being plant-based. They're going to break it down for us. So
I was already on the show, Dr. Mel. You didn't have to call me.
Okay.
I'm flexing. I'm doing my bodybuilder flex.
Oh, got you. I didn't know what that was, but I got you now.
I'm just saying, you don't want me to rip
Thank
off
you.
the
Thank
shirt.
you for helping us out with that, so that we knew exactly what you were doing, because there was some confusion going on.
It was confusement. It's a
Right,
new word,
right.
confusement.
But bottom line, I want everybody to share, because this is going to be a fantastic show tonight. Anybody who's trying to get their health in order, share it with them. Anybody who has blood pressure, cholesterol concerns, diabetes concerns, just share it. Share it with everybody, because it's going to be fantastic.
Right. So
Indeed.
shall we get into the recap?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Definitely.
Let's do it.
Well, y'all, it seems like, to kick this off with the numbers, it seems like Omicron is finally gasping its last breath.
All right.
That's great news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although we are over 79 million cases, in the last few days, we've had fewer than 75,000 new cases a day. That even sounds kind of crazy to say, but if you compare it to a month ago, we were having over 950,000 cases a day. So that is like a significant 90% drop. Hospitalizations are down. That's great too.
Great.
Right.
But did y'all know that Omicron has killed 120,000 people by itself?
Whoa, no. Wow.
It's kind of sobering. I mean, that was supposed to be the mild variant, right?
Right.
Right.
It's supposed to be the weak one. Right.
Right, exactly. But it infected so many people that just from the numbers alone so many people have ended up dying, and we're still hovering around 2,000 deaths a day, which is more than the daily death toll for Delta and actually most of the other variants, except the one that was around last winter before vaccinations were available. So it took its toll. It really did.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into some vax facts, Dr. Mill.
Okay. Well, 69% of people over 5 have been vaccinated, 45% boosted. Shout out to the Latino community because,
Okay.
yeah, hey, our Latino brothers and sisters have shown up to get their vaccinations. Their rate of vaccination actually outpaces that of the white population. And so they actually did better in this last Omicron surge, thankfully. We're still
Wow.
trying to close the gap, the vaccination gap between blacks and whites. Black people have not
Mhm.
yet reached the same vaccination rates as whites, but there has been a significant improvement. So that's good too. And amongst all this information, right? Y'all heard about the CDC changing COVID criteria?
Yes.
No.
Yes, I heard about that.
Yeah, well, just if Lila, if you haven't heard about it, that means a lot of other people haven't heard about it. So
Right.
basically, the criteria that a community should use to decide um, whether to mask or not indoors, it has changed. So the CDC is coming up with this new criteria. It's based not on community spread. So how likely is it that I'll get COVID when I walk out my door? It's more based upon the rate of hospitalizations, right? And the number
Oh.
of cases. So that's different.
Okay.
So if you
Mhm.
go by this new criteria, about 60% of the country is low to moderate risk. But if you go by the old criteria, it's like 90% is still um is still
Not
high
it's not
risk.
funny, but yeah.
Change the
Well, it's
goalposts.
true. And
It's
I
just
don't know if
changing
y'all
the goalposts.
remember, we friend of the show, Dr. Seble Kasai. She was the
Mhm.
immunologist from Georgetown who came on and talked to us about monoclonal antibodies. She wrote an op-ed for the Daily Beast, and she said that, hey, this is premature, this change in mask mandates and all that, and it's politically not scientifically based because transmission levels are still high in a lot of places. Our vaccination
Right.
rates are still below 70%, and emerging variants are still on the horizon. There's still a possibility. So, why can't we just kind of hang out with masks a little while longer until we get the vaccination rates up?
Mhm.
Springtime comes, we could do more stuff outside. So she makes some excellent points um, in that um, in that episode in that op-ed
Op-ed.
rather.
Mhm.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Listen, my mask. I'm buying all the masks, keeping them, wearing them.
Uh-huh.
Mask is a part of my wardrobe. It just is what it is.
It is
So,
what it
Right,
is.
exactly.
uh, the city and county guidelines can change all they want to, and they are changing in Los Angeles, but not for me in my house. All
Right.
right. So we addressed this before, but it is great information. Get boosted. Why, Dr. Mill?
Because it cuts the risk of long COVID, it cuts the risk of hospitalization, and it cuts the risk of death. And both those people who were vaccinated and boosted during Delta and Omicron had up to 40 times less risk of hospitalization compared to people who weren't vaccinated at all. It's a better
Mm,
strategy than waiting and seeing. It's a better strategy than CMOS and supplements by themselves.
mhm.
And it's a better strategy than relying on prior COVID infection to protect you. So still go ahead and get boosted. It takes a couple weeks for the booster shot to kick in and rev your immune system up. So now is a great time when things are kind of quiet, right? To go ahead and get
Mhm.
boosted in anticipation of a potential another um, variant down the line.
Okay. All right. So get boosted, people, but don't try ivermectin, maybe.
But
Maybe don't do that.
whatever you do,
Yeah.
don't do
It
ivermectin.
It is the nail in the coffin for ivermectin. Yet another study came out that does not support the use of ivermectin for patients, high risk patients with mild to moderate COVID during the first week of illness. They gave them ivermectin, and it did not prevent progression to severe disease. In other words, people who got it still got very sick. And
Mhm.
so this is yet another trial that has proven that. And so I think we can pretty much put that to bed.
Okay.
It was already in bed. I guess like I said, we putting it in a coffin, putting it in the ground.
Right. Putting it in the ground.
You
All
know,
right.
meanwhile, regular diseases and ailments are still raging. Like,
Yeah.
you know, for
Mhm.
Black and Latinx people, asthma is still a great thing in our communities.
Yeah,
Dr. Mel.
absolutely. And that's a lot of times because of our diet, because of greater levels of air pollution, our environment. All these things are factors that increase Black and Latinos people's risk for asthma. It's not genetic, it's sort of living conditions. And
Mhm.
it shows that people with moderate to severe asthma, a new study came out that showed that they have 15% fewer asthma flares when they're put on an inhaled glucocorticoid. Now, what is that? You might have heard of inhaled steroids. That's what that is. And so, people missed fewer days of work, missed less school. They were able to participate in more activities when they were on this medication as compared to people who didn't get it. And so the take home point is this: if you have moderate to severe asthma, make sure that you're seeing an asthma specialist. That's really
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Talk with your doctor about ways to improve your asthma, including adding um, that inhaled steroid. Quit smoking, super important, and get away from anybody who's smoking, also super important. Get allergy
Mhm.
tested. A lot of times we don't realize that we might be allergic to certain things. And so that's important to know. And that might be a trigger for your asthma. Um, and then weight loss. Weight loss is actually proven to help to control asthma symptoms as well. So
Okay.
make sure you keep those things in mind if you have moderate to severe asthma, or share it with your loved ones who might.
Right. All right. So, our final recap topic is about maternal deaths. And this has been a topic that has been on our radar for some time now. But apparently, maternal deaths rose during the first year of the pandemic. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. That's the latest year that we have data for. But this was a problem, like you said, it was already on our radar. The United
Hmm.
States has a much higher rate of pregnancy related deaths than other developed countries. But in 2020, the rates went up even more. And
Wow.
of course, unfortunately, as Black people,
Yeah.
like they say, when the rest of the country gets a cold, we get pneumonia. Well, the same thing is true with these maternal deaths. For African American women, we account for 1 in 3 maternal deaths, even though we're only 13% of the population, right?
Wow.
So, some of that excess death in maternal death in 2020 was due to COVID,
Hmm.
directly due to COVID. Also, less people getting prenatal care because they were afraid to go into the doctor. But,
Hmm.
for Black women, it's also poor communication on the part of healthcare providers. It's also the wear and tear on our bodies associated with the chronic stress of racism that leads to higher rates of underlying diseases like heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, which for a pregnant
Hmm.
woman can be, you know, um, have very negatively impactful on your health. And so, again, just some tips. If you're pregnant, start early with prenatal care. See if your health insurance covers something called a health coach or a doula. We had a whole program on this about 6 months
Right.
ago, but health coaches are actually shown in pregnancy to improve outcomes because they help to bridge that communication gap between the doctor and the pregnant mom. Um, talk to a nutritionist if you need advice, or listen to the show that's coming up that we're about to talk about. Um, mental health care. Pregnancy can be super stressful, and
Yeah.
stress levels also um, promote these underlying chronic diseases, blood pressure issues,
Mhm.
etc. Quit smoking, of course, and then get all your vaccinations, including those for COVID.
Yeah, I think
All
that's
right.
super important. I think shout out to all the doulas out there and health
Yeah.
coaches. We have our built-in Dr. Yola, who's a doula and a pediatrician, right, Dr. Mel?
Yeah,
She's a
absolutely.
friend of the
She
show.
she's also a friend of the show. She's been on to talk about that. We may have to have her back because
Right.
that was a great episode. People really liked it.
And shout out to my goddaughters who is studying to be a doula. We want to
That's
shout
right.
her out. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we have people who type in crazy things into the chats
Such as
such as Will Downing saying, I just like saying that word, doula. That's Will,
well, thank you, Will.
this show is for you. Stupid. All right. So
So is it that time now?
it is that time. What time is it?
So,
The weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
So this week I got a text from a new member of the Twitter Finger family, Tevin Twitter Finger. Tevin Twitter Fingers says, my girlfriend's pregnancy doctor, he didn't know what the doctor was talking about getting vaccinated against COVID. But I ain't with that. I want him to have all his fingers and toes.
okay, Tevin. Dr. Mel, can you school him, please?
Well, all fathers are anxious about the pregnancies, right? And wanting to make sure that their baby comes out okay. Um, but not only have COVID vaccines never been found to cause birth defects, getting vaccinated against COVID-19 during pregnancy was associated with about a 60% reduced risk for being hospitalized with COVID in the first 6 months of the baby's life, right? Um, and then they also found that among babies with COVID-19, those who were admitted to the ICU, the sickest ones, 88% were born to mothers who weren't vaccinated before or
Mhm.
during pregnancy. So and the one baby who died in the study was born to a mom who was unvaccinated. So, what they're seeing with vaccination and pregnancy is the later that you get vaccinated, the more protection the baby gets during the pregnancy. Um, it's especially important since there was an increase in hospitalization among very young children and infants during this past Omicron surge. So and also it works like other vaccinations in pregnancy. So we see it with flu vaccine, with whooping cough vaccines, that when the mom gets vaccinated, she
Mhm.
passes the antibodies to the baby and gives the baby protection during the first 6 months of life when the baby's immune system is not yet mature enough to start making antibodies for him or herself. So and then on flip side, right, we know that COVID during pregnancy is associated with preterm birth and even stillbirth. And there's
Right.
no infertility risk or increased risk of miscarriage associated with the vaccine. So, bottom line, Kevin, please reconsider your position. Please listen to your girlfriend's OBGYN, pregnancy doctor, and ask any questions that you have of that doctor.
Thanks, Dr. Mel.
All right.
Actually, it was Tevin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All the Twitter Finger family have
You're
T's
right.
for first name.
I thought that was a little unusual. Sorry about that, Tevin. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Lil Tevin, as they call him. All right.
All right. Well, thank you all for walking us through the debunk and the recap. And we are going to be seeing you a little bit later, Lila and Wayne. Um, and I want to remind the audience, make sure you get your questions in there because I know you're going to have a lot of them for this fantastic segment that we're about to go into right now. And And I know for a lot of you, you've been to the doctor and the doctor has said, you need to be eating healthy, right? You need to improve your diet, improve your nutrition. But what does that really mean? Well, our next two guests say that plant-based eating is the way to go. But how do you get started? What are the health benefits? And can you really thrive on a plant-based diet? Well, I'm about to bring in this esteemed panel to help us break it down. Our first guest, Dr. Patricia Davidson. She's a cardiologist and internal medicine doctor who practices in Washington, D.C. at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center, where her main focus is preventive cardiology. All those things that you should be doing to prevent heart disease in the first place or to improve your heart health. Welcome, Dr. Davidson. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then our second guest is Morgan Simone. She's a health and wellness creative entrepreneur who teaches wellness and movement through digital products, services, and experiences, primarily for millennial audiences, including a course that she has called the Plant-Based Bible. She's transformed her health through plant-based nutrition and has dedicated her life to educating melanated audiences on the power of taking care of self through movement and nutrition. Welcome, Morgan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, I am going to jump right into this. Let's start with Dr. Davidson. When you tell your patients to eat a plant-based diet, what are you talking about?
Actually, I don't tell them to eat a plant-based diet. I tell them that they need to, I tell them that I have to meet them where they are. And I tell them that they need to get to the numbers that are going to save their life. And those numbers are your cholesterol numbers, your sugar numbers, which can be translated into an A1C, which is 4 months of sugar average, your blood pressure, and your body mass index. And if you can achieve those numbers, then you're in a relatively safe position, because we don't just throw it, we didn't just make up these numbers. These numbers are very real. We know that if your blood pressure is over 120, you have a 30% increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and death. So that's been studied over and over and over again. We know that the ideal cholesterol level, the bad cholesterol, the one that kills you, should ideally be under 70, because that is the level in which we know that plaque has a tendency to be reversed. The plaque, that's the cholesterol buildup in your arteries, has a tendency to reverse. We say that the general public is okay for them to be at under 100, but ideally you want to be under 70 if you can. The average American LDL is 130, and the average heart attack and stroke is 130. And so, and we know that if your body mass index is over 25, that you have a significant increased risk of heart attack, stroke, death, and cancers. So all of these are the things that I say you need to get to your numbers, so that the patient comes in on the usual American diet. I can't sit up there and say, just go to a plant-based diet. I said to say, let's look at your numbers and let's see what you can do. And what a person does when they go, the first thing that I shouldn't say uneducated, but a person who doesn't know anything about plant-based diet does, is that they think that a whole lot of French fries and other things like that, just as long as it's not an animal, is what they should be eating. And so they end up filling up their diet with a whole lot of carbohydrates and starches, and then they end up driving up the sugar. So that's not helpful either. So I tell them that they need to slowly wean themselves off of animals, definitely come off of red animals, red meat, because we know that people who eat red meat have a significantly higher incidence of both death and cancers and heart attacks and strokes. So you definitely want to get rid of red meat. So I always say that the animals that walk on the land and animals that walk on the bottom of the sea are the animals that are highest in cholesterol. The animals that swim and the animals that fly, if you take off their skin, which is where most of the cholesterol is, which is most of the cells are, people need to realize that cholesterol only comes from animals, because every living cell is made up of cholesterol.
That's a really important point that I think a lot of people don't realize. Cholesterol only comes from animals. I just want to repeat that because it's important. Yeah.
Only comes from animals. And people think that when I say, where do you think cholesterol comes from? They say fatty food. I said, well, no, a French fry, you know, in fat is not going to give you cholesterol. So we are animals, and we're made up of cholesterol, and our liver is made to metabolize our cholesterol. So that when we put all the animals' cholesterol onto our liver basically just shuts down and says, I worked enough today, I can't continue to metabolize any more cholesterol, because we have enzymes in our liver that metabolize cholesterol. And so our liver enzymes are for our cholesterol from our living cells. And when you you know that this is not natural, because the animals that are supposed to eat other animals never develop atherosclerosis or clogging of the arteries. The animals that are not supposed to do that, like rabbits, and if they're force-fed animals, they end up developing atherosclerosis. So we know that it is not natural for us to do this. But just because we're a more sophisticated animal, we were capable of doing things that allowed us to do things that were not necessarily part of our natural being early on. Whereas a giraffe can't change who they are. They're only going to eat what they've been born to eat for the last thousands of years. But humans are able to cultivate and grow and kill and do all these other things. And as a result, we've ended up eating foods that are not necessarily healthy for us. But I never tell people they should just go plant-based. They need to look at their numbers, and they need to gradually come off of the animals that walk on the bottom of the ocean and the animals that walk on land, and then begin to wean themselves. Fish have the lowest amount of cholesterol, and then has omega-3 in it, which is beneficial for the artery wall as well. So you need to start weaning yourself off, because if you cannot keep the diet that you have for a prolonged period of time, then it doesn't make sense to do it for a month and then come off. It has to be something that you can tolerate and get your numbers to where they need to be. So we work on the numbers, we work on changing the diet. I think the biggest problem that most of my patients have is
yeah. So Dr. Davidson, I just want to get Morgan in here, because I want her to talk a little bit about how she made the transition, given everything that you've said in terms of weaning. You know, what does that mean for sort of your everyday person? So I want to bring her in here to talk a little bit about how did she make the transition into eating a plant-based diet?
Yeah, so I guess my transition was a little bit was kind of all of a sudden, because like a little bit all of a sudden, a little bit like over time. When the day I decided to stop eating meat, I was just like, okay, yeah, I'm not eating it anymore. Like, I don't eat it anymore. I watched some things. I had been reading some things. But I had been doing some fasting practices over the years, even before that, of where I would go like a month without chicken or burgers or whatever. But I know it's usually harder for people who like love that food. So when I'm teaching like clients or in my course, I think about, instead of thinking that you have to get rid of something, you're just replacing. So instead of having chicken and rice, you replace it with a couple cups of lentils and rice. And so you're just like swapping out, versus thinking like, oh, I just have to cut this out. I have to get rid of this. Or I guess what Dr. Patricia was saying, like pork, if you're eating pork all the time, or a steak or something, you can just say, okay, you can start by Mondays and Mondays, I'm not going to do my usual steak. I'm going to do chickpeas and greens and whatever. So just think about replacing and swapping out, versus, oh, I have to get rid of this.
Right. So maybe even having, like, I think some people start with meatless Monday, for example, and maybe
Right.
that could turn into meatless Friday too, right? So sort of that gradual idea. So Dr. Davidson, you talked about atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. What's actually happening when you start to get away from animal products? What's happening to your arteries? Can they actually repair themselves? What's going on?
How to repair that? You can actually reverse the cholesterol plaque in your artery. And we know that if you can get your cholesterol low enough. And that has been shown in trials in which cholesterol medicine was given. And people actually were able to, on one of the stronger cholesterol drugs, get down to under 70. And there was a trend towards reversing the plaque. So we know that's possible. I wouldn't call it a repair, but I would call it a reversal. And if you have had any procedure done on your artery wall, like bypass surgery or an angioplasty where you balloon the artery and crack the cholesterol plaque, and then you put a stent in there to keep the plaque up against the wall. If you have any of that, you must have a cholesterol level of under 70. Your bad cholesterol has to be under 70, or you're going to lose the benefit of all those procedures. So that's an absolute necessity. And we know that from data. We also know that that there have been studies on people who have become vegans, and they actually did see, Dean Ornish did that decades ago. You actually did see a reversal in the plaque by looking at CAT scans and other techniques. You can actually see reversal of the plaque. So it is reversible. And that's very important. Atherosclerosis is preventable, treatable, and most importantly, it's reversible. And so,
Right.
but you have to do it with an extremely low cholesterol and controlled blood pressure and controlled sugar, because all of those things are risk factors for atherosclerosis. So not just one thing, cholesterol. You have to get all of your risk factors down and controlled in order for you to reverse that plaque. So you can't have an LDL of under 70 and then have a sugar of 200 or a blood pressure of 160, because then you're still going to be developing atherosclerosis. So all your risk, that's why numbers are so important. All your risk factors have to be corrected for that, but it is reversible.
Great. So, Morgan, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that you see that people have when transitioning their eating patterns?
Definitely dairy and cheese. Usually I come across people that are like, okay, I can go, without meat or whatever, but there are certain chemicals in foods that make us crave the food and make us want the food. So it's really like fighting past those cravings and just retraining your brain, retraining your body to be like, oh, I actually don't crave this. Or if I do crave it, I can get this nutrient that I'm craving in some plant-based form. Also food is very it's heavy in our culture. So especially for us melanated folk, like we gather together to eat and share, and it's usually all the foods that we shouldn't be eating around holiday times and stuff. So it's getting very confident in sharing your why, having a purpose, like, oh, I have to get my numbers down, or I want to be better for myself, better for my family. But it's hard because it's a mental thing first, really.
Yeah. So having that why is really important. So for you, what were some of the benefits? I mean, Dr. Davidson talked about what's happening with your arteries, which, by the way, those arteries are what lead to your brain, your heart, and your kidney and your legs. So therefore, when those arteries improve, your risk for stroke, your risk for heart attack, your risk for kidney problems, and your risk for lack of circulation in your legs goes down. But what sort of benefits did you see? I mean, you're pretty young, so what sort of benefits did you see as you've transitioned?
Yeah, so I, for one, felt so much more energy. And you don't really realize you're tired until you start experiencing a new way of life. But when I cut out any animal based products or byproducts, my energy was amazing. The way I was able to recover. So as you said before, I'm a bodybuilder and I'm a dancer. And so recovery is super important for my body to be able to continue to move. And I had less soreness, and I still had the energy even after a crazy workout the next day to be like, okay, I can do this again. I also healed ailments of like headaches. I used to get chronic headaches growing up. Those cleared up as soon as I changed my diet. Also, I had digestion issues. And in my high school years, as soon as I fully went plant-based, my gut healed itself. So it's been like a total new way of living that I've experienced. And that we don't really know we're sick until like something gets really bad. But then when you start implementing the change and you're like, oh, wow, this is a whole new way of living. It outweighs any like burger that I'm missing out on,
Wow. So, and I think that's really an important point, that even before you get to the numbers that Dr. Davidson talked about being out of control, there are signs that your body that you might be missing. The the lack of energy, etc., the poorly healing gut or the poor recovery. Dr. Davidson, you know, there are a lot of people who, you know, their mom or their dad may have had a heart attack at age 55, and they're getting to that age and they're very concerned about their own health. What would you tell them about their likelihood of having a heart attack and some of the things that they can do to possibly address that risk?
Well, that is a risk factor. If you have members of your family who are 50 who are having heart attacks and strokes, that means there's a genetic predisposition. So that's a risk factor as well. It's not as frequent as all the other risk factors, but that's definitely a risk factor. And so and in fact, the pediatricians should be looking at all of the children. You should tell everybody in your family to have their children checked if you have a high cholesterol, because the pediatricians need to start following that very, very early in children. So that's just one of our many risk factors. And you don't have to inherit, just because you may have a bad gene, doesn't mean you have to live a lifestyle that promotes it. So that if you started eating differently when you knew that you had all these members in your family with heart disease, then you should be changing the way you eat. And you know what, one way that I try to encourage people to change what they do is that I tell them that the way we eat, basically, we have been indoctrinated by the food industry, that we may think it's cultural and we may think our grandmothers gave us that, but stop and think for a minute. What does chocolate, bunnies, and ham have to do with the crucifixion? I mean, Jesus was
or any other holiday, right?
Right? You know, and what does gluttony have to do with Jesus being born? And so all of these things, the food industry has introduced them. So the reason ham was introduced is because we already did turkey, and we do chicken all the time. So these are all things, and then we think, well, if my grandmother did that because she's the one that, you know, perfected the turkey, right? And no, your grandmother may have perfected the turkey, but she was influenced by the food industry to think that turkey should be associated with Easter. And everything we do, the food industry has had a hand in it. They've also put things in our food that make them addicting, like salt and caffeine are very addicting, and sugar is very addicting. We need to recognize that sugar is something that we as slaves were forced to cultivate for other people, and now we end up being the slaves to the sugar because we're the ones with most of the diabetes. And so all of these things have to be, you know, thought about. And then why do we have all the worst restaurants in our neighborhood, which give us the worst foods, and the commercials and everything which indoctrinate us? So when I try to present that to people and they start thinking, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So you have to kind of convince people to eat a different way. And then all of a sudden, and everything now, the food industry doesn't want to be left behind. So they have made a substitute for everything. So we have the cauliflower, they know everybody's low carb. So we have the cauliflower pizza crust. We now have the cauliflower rice and the cauliflower mashed potatoes. We have, of course, we have all the highly processed burgers that have come along from the food industry. And so all of these kinds of things have come along. And so that we have to be very careful of those too, because those are so heavily processed, and we have so many chemicals and salt put in them. We have to be careful.
When you say highly processed burgers, you're talking about the quote unquote plant-based substitute, meat substitute.
Anything that comes from the food industry, we have to be highly suspect, because they are nothing more than ruthless capitalists who could care less about our health. And so, and anything that has 10-syllable words on the side of the box, again, be suspect. In fact, you shouldn't be doing anything in a box, because we have fresh food everywhere, especially if you're in California, and if you're in DC, everything is shipped to DC. We have things that are seasonal, like mangoes, which is a seasonal fruit. And we can get mangoes in the middle of December, whereas the people who produce the mangoes can't get them except around March and April. So we get every fruit, every vegetable all year round. So we don't have to eat anything in a package. And so that's one thing you have to, so you don't have to sit there and figure out how many grams of this and how many, you know, milligrams of that. If you have to read it in a package, you don't need to eat it, because you have fresh everything in your supermarket, right? So those are things that people have to get used to.
So I call it single ingredient food eating. So Morgan, you know, you have a whole curriculum about how people can transition. So along the lines, I think Dr. Davidson made an excellent point. It's like free your mind, right, from all the conditioning that you receive. Do you have any tips that you can provide, or teasers about your curriculum that you can provide for the audience?
Yes. And before I get into that, everything Dr. Davidson was saying, oh my gosh, is like 100% so
Yes.
true, because it's crazy the programming that is out there, especially for us. And it's been that way for generations. So that is really the biggest thing when I'm working with talking to people in my course. You have to, it's a process of relearning and reprogramming our mind to be like, okay, let me actually put myself first and not just do what, is being told or what's being taught or what culturally passed down. So for tips, you have to give yourself grace as you transition. But as we talked about before, the why is super important on why you're doing it. And again, you have to put yourself first and be like, I'm doing this for my health so I can be here. And then also getting in community with people who have the same mindset or want to be the best or want to be better. So that's one thing I'm creating. I created this course a couple of years ago, and people love it just because it's simple information. But as it relaunches this year, it's going to be about the community and us sharing recipes, sharing places around the US that, fresh markets, restaurants that are promoting plant-based things, because it's about the environment. We've grown up in a certain environment, and when you're trying to make a change, you have to then change the environment so that it can reflect,
Right.
where you're going.
I think people say you're as healthy as your 5 closest friends.
Yeah.
So I think
That's super important.
that's kind of what you're saying. So listen, I
Yes.
have a ton more questions, but it is actually time to take audience questions. So we're going to bring Lila and Wayne back in, and they can tell us what's going on out there in chat land.
It is, first of all, it's a great topic. So we have a ton of comments and questions. Lila, you want to start first, or you want me to go? Okay, I'll go first. Lila,
Go ahead.
Always First Class Media asks, should we eat according to our blood type?
Okay, for those of you all who couldn't see, Dr. Davidson rolled her eyes. So Dr. Davidson, I'm going to ask you to take that.
Oh, well, first of all, one of the blood types, you're supposed to be eating a whole lot of red meat. So please, no, that isn't correct. You need to eat according to your numbers, and nobody should tell you that you should be eating a whole lot of lamb and pork and beef because of a particular blood type. And because all of the diets that are described in that are not healthy diets, I would definitely not say that. So you need to, and there's not a fad involved in this. Everybody seems to want somebody to give them a different fad. I mean, it's just a matter of look at your numbers and begin to get off of the foods that that are not good. And sugar plays a very major role. So the high carbohydrate, you cannot go plant-based and eat a whole bunch of carbs and then drive up your sugar. So you really have to get off of what I tell my patients is eat green vegetables and protein. And because green vegetables are the lowest carbohydrate in sugar. And that carbohydrates are all fruits, grains, and vegetables. And proteins are animals and beans. And the 100% all amino acids that you need for protein in a plant is going to be tofu or the soybean. And so I tell my patients that they should focus mostly on green carbohydrates and pick their protein, which hopefully will be most days be plant-based. And then if they have to do an animal, then it should be a fish that swims. And then be careful of all the carbohydrates that they're taking, because if they do that, most of my patients are overweight and most of my patients have high sugars. So at the same time that I'm trying to get them off of a whole lot of meat, I have to deal with that sugar content, and that's extremely difficult. There are plants that are high in protein, like quinoa is high in protein. There are breads that you have to be very careful doing bread, because wheat is just not something that we need to keep in our body because of the high sugar content that we all have, or the diabetes problem that we have. So if you're going to do a bread, it should be something sprouted like Ezekiel bread that you find in the freezer section, and you should try to do an open sandwich, or half of a slice of bread as you begin to wean yourself. It's harder to wean off of carbohydrates than it is to wean off of meat. So that I find that
lettuce wraps work too.
That's
for a
another one.
sandwich.
That's
Yeah.
correct. So it's my patients come in with so many problems that I have to get them off of so much that I have to be very careful in how I try to get them to wean. So I try to say green vegetables and protein, and then pick your protein to be the lowest in cholesterol or no cholesterol.
Got it. Any other questions? Thanks, Dr. Davidson.
I have a question. I have a question from Stacy Hollenbeck in Los Angeles. What are some quick go-to staples to have in your refrigerator for beginning a plant-based diet?
Great question. Morgan, you want to take that one?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have to list the list that I have in my course. In your refrigerator, I would say it's the green vegetables, just as Dr. Davidson was saying, assortment of green vegetables, fruits that are low glycemic, so blueberries, raspberries, any type of berries, so that we're not doing the high sugar content, just as Dr. Davidson was saying. What else? A lot of water, getting away from processed juices, or fresh juices are good if you squeeze them yourself, but anything processed or with a lot of ingredients on it's not good. And in terms of your pantry, your cabinet, having different assortments of beans, and like Dr. Davidson was saying, quinoa as a grain, wild rice, as our study is a good grain. So having 2 to 3 good grains and an assortment of green vegetables and low glycemic fruits will get you on the right path.
Fantastic. All right. What else do we have out there?
We have another question. This one comes from Michelle Walker Scales. Dr. Davidson, is it true that once a person is on blood pressure medicine and even statins, that it's difficult to get off of them? Does their body learn to depend on them?
Okay.
And just to be clear, statins are cholesterol medicine for those that don't know. No.
The statin is because the generic name of all of the cholesterol drugs end in the syllable statin: suvastatin, orvastatin, pravastatin, etc. They are not addicting substances, all right? You do not become addicted to cholesterol or blood pressure medicine, right? What you are addicted to is the lifestyle that created your need for that, and you rarely find people capable of changing their lifestyle. And that's one of the biggest things. So it's not that you're on it forever because you're addicted to it or because your body becomes dependent upon it. Is that you've never lost enough weight. So if you're weighing 300 pounds and you get down to 280 pounds, you are not coming off of blood pressure medicine, all right? If you're on cholesterol medicine and you absolutely can't give up scrapple, somebody just the other day said you're still eating scrapple. if you just cannot give up your scrapple, no, you will not come off of your statin. And I mean, this is what I deal with. I mean, it sounds comical, but this is what I sit and listen to all day long. I mean, people are crying in my office because they can't give up their scrapple. The scrapple is more important than their life. And so the problem is that they can't change their lifestyle enough. So you would have to do, by the way, every pound that you gain or lose is worth 2 millimeters of mercury. So that if your blood pressure was 150 and you lost 10 pounds, your blood pressure would then go down to 130. If you lost another 10 pounds, your blood pressure would be normal. So the question is, can you lose that much weight? And the average person has an extreme difficulty losing that kind of weight. So your blood pressure and your weight are directly related. So if you lost enough weight, you would not need blood pressure medicine. And then if your cholesterol could get down low enough with a plant-based diet or mostly plant-based diet, and you eliminate most of your animal products, then you could possibly come off of that. But the reality of the fact is that the average person is not capable of doing a lifestyle change because it is so difficult in this society. This is I call this an atherosclerotic society, in which everything we do promotes atherosclerosis and diabetes. And it is very difficult for us to change that when everything, I mean, it's sort of, I like to compare it to crack. It's harder to come off of sugar than it is to come off of crack, because when you're on crack, you probably end up in jail. Nobody wants to be around you. You get put out of your house and all that. You lose all your friends. When you're on a whole lot of sugar and you weigh 300 pounds, you got lots of friends. You go to church and everybody welcomes you. You go to the office party and the office meeting and you're bringing the donuts and everybody's welcoming you. And you're cooking the best Thanksgiving and dinners, so that you can't come off of that addiction because everybody loves you for it. And so it's just a society that promotes bad eating because the food industry has promoted that and keeps us into that whole tradition. So we can't really change our lifestyle. And so they are not addicting medicines. It's the lifestyle that's addicting.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? We're on a roll.
Yvonne Smith says, we are creatures of collards, kale, and green beans. What are other vegetables that we're possibly ignoring? I just discovered ratatouille through a cooking class.
All right. Morgan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, there are so many vegetables and fruits that we miss out on just because we're so narrow-minded. Arugula, spinach, kale, those are just some leafy greens. Swiss chard,
Brussels sprouts.
They're like, just literally searching green vegetables will pull up a whole list and open your mind up to the possibilities, because even in the US alone, we don't even have all of the vegetables that are available in the world. So yeah, just doing a quick Google search will help.
I gotta throw in for the Jamaicans in the audience, callaloo. Gotta throw that in there.
book, Jamaicans. So we have a question from Marv West. For the past 10 years, my numbers have been on target. I suffer from peripheral neuropathy in my feet. Do you recommend the plant-based diet for the cure?
Well, the plant-based diet might actually cause it if you're B12 deficient. That's one thing we need to talk about. If you're going to plant-based diet, you must take B12 because that usually comes from animals and you really can't get it as easily from a plant. So you must be on B12. So that first of all, you need to work up the cause of neuropathy. Neuropathy comes from a B12 deficiency. It comes from increased sugar. And even to the point where you could have a mild, what some people call pre-diabetes. I never call anybody pre-anything, because even though we don't treat the disease at that point in time, you're still having all the side effects of the disease. So when somebody says you're pre-diabetic, you're still clogging your arteries and damaging your kidneys and doing all the things that the person who's classified as a diabetic has. And so I just recently had treated a patient with a mildly elevated mildly elevated sugar, and her neuropathy went away. And I was quite surprised because I always thought it had to be uncontrolled sugar. So even a mild elevation in your sugar could end up causing a neuropathy. So you really need to work up why you have the neuropathy first. Make sure you're not having some spinal disease and all of that. So your doctor needs to work that up. But you should just take some B12, even if you do have a neuropathy. And so those are some of the things that need to be done. And but it's most commonly with diabetes, even if it's not out of control.
Great. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
A
quick lightning round? Okay.
One quick question. Max Anderson says, what are the foods that one can snack off as you wean yourself off of meat and sugar?
Morgan, if you can take that, and then also say how people can follow you to learn more about your course.
Yes. Oh, since I'm all about the whole foods, go for whole snacks. So a fruit, nuts, anything that's not processed. And it also, I know it sounds like laborious, but learning ways to put dates and nuts together to make your own Nutri-Grain bars or whatever. So it takes a little bit of education, which is why I created the Plant-Based Bible, because we usually don't have the time to do all the research that is required to transition. So to learn more about my course, the Plant-Based Bible, you can follow me on Instagram at the King Morg. That's my actual handle. And I'll be sharing information about the Plant-Based Bible, where you can purchase it, and also the relaunch with the community aspect coming this summer.
All right. And of course, Dr. Patricia Davidson.
Yes, can I add one more thing? Because most
Yes.
of my patients are overweight and high in sugar. Celery sticks with some hummus in it. You don't want to do necessarily carrots because that's high in sugar, but cucumbers with some hummus would be better for somebody who's overweight or diabetic. And you could also roast some chickpeas. I mean, you can buy them in a very expensive package with salt, but you want to roast your own and season your own chickpeas, and that will replace your popcorn and things like that. Or just keep a little bit of dinner behind. And then when you get hungry at 9 o'clock, you would snack on that. And remember, snacking is what the food industry has indoctrinated us to do when we're sitting around reading and on the computer late at night. So that's another one of those addictions that you have to try to get rid of. And, and just make sure that it's always protein and not high in sugar.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Morgan, Dr. Davidson. Fantastic information. And of course, thank you to Wayne and Lila for throwing us those fantastic questions, and to the audience, most importantly, for coming up with them. We have learned so much here tonight, and we're really grateful for this wonderful information. So before I go, I just want to remind everyone, all my Be Health Empowered family listening right now, that you can participate in a special research study at Howard University. All it entails is filling out 2 surveys about how you have been coping during COVID. Participation is voluntary, but if you fill out the surveys, you're eligible for compensation up to $100, depending on whether you complete both of them. So if you're interested, please contact Dana Harvey Research at gmail.com. That's my assistant, Dana Harvey, DANAHARVEY, research at gmail.com. Well, thank you so much to my audience for tuning in. I will be on the Russ Parr Morning Show next Monday. And if I don't see you between now and then, when we're back next week with Excuse Me Doctor at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, please remember to be wise, to be well, and to be health empowered. Thanks so much for listening.
My name is Dion Davis. I've tried to live my life with no regrets, but I guess my final regret is not getting vaccinated. Please, don't let not getting vaxxed be your final regret.